This is TWiT.
The former Apple PR chief, Katie Cotton, we just learned, has died. In fact, passed away on April 6th, so Thursday. Last Thursday as we're recording this show. I believe Katie Cotton worked at Apple as head of PR for more than 20 years. And I was hoping that we could hear a little bit about you folks as journalists, your experience with Katie Cotton, perhaps herself, but also with her PR team, and maybe how things have changed over time. We'll start with Jason.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I worked with Katie Cotton quite a bit and with her team. She predated Steve Jobs returning to Apple slightly, but I think that Steve Jobs found a kindred spirit in Katie Cotton. She was, how much of it was her philosophy and how much of it was her sort of marching to the tune that Steve wanted her to march by. But they created how should I put this? Before Katie took over Apple PR, it was a mess. As what I would say in the mid 90s, we couldn't get answers to our questions. We would get told we would get calls back and they wouldn't be called back. I would say that they were much more disciplined. At the same time, I mean, as Katie famously said, my job is not to make the press happy. My job is to sell Apple products, right? Like that, in the end, that is what PR's job is. And none of us forget that they are not our friends. You can be friendly with them, but their job is to promote Apple. That's why they get paid. And so I would say she kept a very disciplined, tightly controlled PR outfit. They would let you know if you wrote something that they didn't like. They were actually very aggressive about that. I personally, I had a few extended conversations with her. I found her extremally intimidating. That's people were like, what do you remember about Katie Cotton? I was like, I was afraid of her. That is how I feel about her. She was just kind of scary because she spoke with authority, and you knew that she had the full force and support of everybody at Apple, including Steve Jobs behind her. What's interesting about how things have changed since she left, they've really had a changing of the guard, although there are a lot of people who kind of came up from Katie's organization. It really has been a changing of the guard there. And I think it's a natural thing that, like, Apple PR in the late 2010s, it started looking at ways of doing PR that were going to be a different playbook than it would have been in the late 90s and early 2000s. It's just natural. And so they've changed the access. There was an old playbook for who got access to what and what level. And, Walt Mossberg gets to come in and get everything. And then, maybe we'll call Jason eventually. And all that sort of stuff happened. And they changed that, and they've got more YouTubers involved. Like, it's just more modern. I think that's just a natural thing that happens when you're going by one playbook and then another. And then Steve Jobs leaving too. I think that Katie Cotton really did run that PR group like Steve wanted her to, and it was a little bare knuckles at times. Like, we're going to punish the people who displease us, and we're going to reward the people who please us. And that still happens, but I don't know. I think Steve was much more adversarial. I'll put it that way, and I think that Katie's PR group reflected that. And apologies, because this is kind of inside baseball. You people on the outside would have gotten this sort of secondhand, right? Based on what access and what was going on the inside to the people in the media. And then you would see the end result of that. But I think Tim Cook's Apple, a little more soft touch. Doesn't mean they're not selling products. They absolutely are, but maybe a little more of a soft touch. Whereas I think that Steve was happy to rattle the cages of the media, and Katie was happy to be the cage rattler too. Yeah.
You say inside baseball, and as we know, it takes about 2.5 hours for the folks to leave the baseball game. So at least for a while, I find this incredibly interesting. I'm curious, Andy, to hear your experience, and then I do kind of want to hear more about how a PR group can approach that conversation of what you wrote is not something we're happy with versus maybe what you wrote is not factually correct. Here's some stuff to correct that. So, but Andy, what was your experience during that time?
I have actually, that's a good question, because I know exactly like the story to talk about, like where I was when the Apple versus Samsung lawsuits were really, really just deep and personal and furious. I was writing a lot about it. I was really sort of skeptical, downright, and sometimes downright, oh come on, Apple, put it together. You're making lots of arguments that just do not stand up to scrutiny. And yeah, I did get a couple of phone calls from Apple about, hey, let's have a group call, and it wasn't. But what I appreciated about it was that it wasn't let's make sure Andy understands that if he doesn't play ball with us, we can make life very difficult for him. It was, we're going to have a very, very direct conversation about, we don't understand like we're going to explain to him directly why we feel the way we feel about certain things. And so long as you understood that relationship, so long as you still had if you knew that you still had the ability to push back. I mean, I had some I don't want to call them arguments, because arguments, and the word argument implies emotion, as opposed to very, very like two people who are like, I'm going to stand my ground and you have to convince me that I'm wrong. And I don't think I'm wrong. Like I specifically remember when they're trying to get at me about how like Samsung's designs. And I said, look, I have in my possession a kitchen scale made well before the iPhone that is the shape of an iPad with rounded corners and a round button at the bottom. And you're saying that Apple has no one else has ever done this. I have in my possession a Palm OS device that predates the iPhone. That is a rounded corner rectangle device dominated by a screen with a rounded button on the bottom. You know, I remember these conversations going on, but also again not feeling as though I'm being taken to the woodshed. Unfortunately, like since she left, I do think that Apple has turned a little bit into that bad territory of this. If you're not helping to promote sometimes it feels as though you get the impression that they're saying our relationship is so that we want you to promote our products. If you're going to be skeptical or questioning things in any way, or if you're trying to do your job as a journalist and seeking information from sources that we didn't approve, we're going to find out about it and we're going to let you know we're unhappy about it. And I don't want anybody to read into that and think that it's more intense than what I'm suggesting, but that is something where, like, again, you go into the acceptable losses of what happens when you do your job properly, and certainly the acceptable losses of after Katie Cotton left Apple are a little bit more intense than they used to be before then. But yeah, she was tough, but very, very fair. And I think that if anybody who, I would like to see someone say the exact same things about a male head of PR that they were saying about Katie when she retired. But oh God, thank God she's gone, because she was mean spirited and she did that. No, that's no different from what a lot of other PR people do. Mm-hmm. I wonder in this tech industry, I wonder what could possibly be different about these two people causing such negative commentary about.
I wonder what that is. Yeah, Alex, from the sort of streaming, event, engineering, video side of things, did you ever have any interactions that you can talk about with Katie Cotton or her team?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had some, not from a streaming perspective, but coverage that we did, had some interactions with her. And for me, all the interactions are really good. So I'm not very confrontational though, because I have to admit that I tend to be, understand the food chain and understand where I sit in it. And so, I was very low in the food chain and I didn't try to act like a shark when I was only a minnow. So I was just happy to be there, and generally, and I caused enough trouble that when I didn't get invited back, I knew why. But I didn't, I kind of understood what that was. But I didn't, it wasn't like, with a lot of PR, it doesn't oftentimes show up as confrontation. You just don't get the invite the next time.
Right.
And a lot of times it's not even, and a lot of times it's not, I mean, because what's interesting is I've worked on the other side longer now than I covered things. And so I'm used to being not so much at Apple, but in other places where I'm in those conversations. And a lot of times there's limited number of seats that they have available for the press, and they pick the ones obviously that are the most advantageous for them. Like it's actually a limited resource. It's not a punitive thing for a lot of them. It's like, we have a section and this is how many seats have been given to us for PR, and they fill them with the ones that are going to make the most difference for them. And I think people make it out to be much more drama driven than it is. It's just like, well, it's not that you're on the blacklist. You're just not on the top of the list that is getting invited to this event because of X, Y, and Z.
And just very quickly, a journalist can do their job without getting help from Apple, without getting help from Microsoft.
Yeah.
So that the fact that you weren't invited to this rollout event doesn't mean they're trying to control you or trying to control the press. It means that, well, guess what? You are going to go to the Apple store and you're going to buy one of these things, and that's how you're going to get a hold of one. If you're committed to doing your job, you can still do your job no matter what a PR company wants you to do or doesn't want you to do.
Yeah, it just makes it more inconvenient, and there's some hope there that by making it inconvenient for you, they're sending a message. It's like a little like dog training or something. It's like, oh, you did a bad thing, and now you're gonna. I mean, we had a round of layoffs, big surprise media layoffs, and a favorite person, I won't mention who it was, but a favorite person of Apple PR was among the layoffs. And the next Apple event that was held, Macworld did not get a briefing, did not get advanced product, had to go buy it at the Apple store ourselves. And then it was back to normal after that. And it was very clearly them expressing their displeasure about one of our people that they liked being laid off. And it's like, interesting, a little punitive, sort of strangely, because like, it's not like people enjoy laying people off, but and then they piled on with punishment when we felt sort of punished enough by having to lay off some of our people. But I do have one really quick Katie Cotton story, which is the one thing that has stuck in my mind most of anything that in terms of how I've interacted with her. And it's that for the 20th anniversary of the Mac, so 2004, I got an interview with Steve Jobs, and it was height of the iPod era, and it took us a year to basically get this thing up and running, to get them to approve it, to get the ground rules set. There were so many ground rules. It was like, Steve doesn't want to talk to you. Okay, he will talk to you, but he won't talk to you about X. He won't talk to you about future products. He doesn't want to talk about the past. It's like, okay, that's we're left with the present.
How was your breakfast today, Steve?
It was a very short, very difficult, one of the most difficult interviews that I've ever done. And he didn't want to be there. And it was very clear he didn't.
You could tell.
Gave a bunch of short answers. But here's the thing. At the very end of it, this is when he was the iCEO. At the very end of it, I said, Steve, you're the interim CEO. Do you have any thoughts about whether you'd like to stay on in this permanently, whether you'd like to do something else and step away? What do you think about your status as like the future of you as a CEO, not about future products at all, right? And there's a long pause, and then he basically gave me this kind of like philosophical, almost like 60s hippies answer, which is, all of us are just renting time here on planet Earth, and you never know how long you're going to be here, and I'm just doing it day to day, right? Hangs up. 5 minutes later, Katie Cotton called.
Oh God!
And she was on the call because she was the please hold for Steve Jobs person. 5 minutes later, Katie Cotton calls me and she says, "You got to take that last question out." and it was not a question. It was like you can't have that last response in there. And we cut it because it was so like, this is not a negotiation, and honestly, we were under so many limited terms at that point. It wasn't going to be a gotcha, obviously something, but afterward, I was like, what was that? Like, why? And it was like a decade later in reporting about Steve Jobs's cancer story that the timing came out. My interview with him was a few weeks after he had been initially diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
Right.
And it was not well known. And the last thing they wanted is Steve Jobs being philosophical about life and death in print somewhere.
Oh,
and
my goodness.
And it was like 10 years later, I was like, oh, Katie, I understand now. I understand why you were freaking out about him giving some sort of hippy-dippy response about life and death, because she knew what was actually going on. So that was her job. It was protecting the company and protecting Steve Jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we should talk Linux. It's the operating system that runs the internet, but your game consoles, cell phones, and maybe even the machine on your desk. But you already knew all that. What you may not know is that TWiT now has a show dedicated to it, the Untitled Linux Show. Whether you're a Linux pro, a burgeoning sysadmin, or just curious what the big deal is, you should join us on the Club TWiT Discord every Saturday afternoon for news, analysis, and tips to sharpen your Linux skills. And then make sure you subscribe to the Club TWiT exclusive Untitled Linux Show. Wait, you're not a Club TWiT member yet? Well, go to twit.tv/clubtwit and sign up. Hope to see you there.